So, Parsha Illuminated for Parsha's Pikudei. And I hope today to share three separate ideas from the Parsha. I think each one very interesting in its own right. And the first comes from the very beginning of the Parsha. So, Parsha's Pikudei brings us to finally the Mishkan is complete, and at the beginning of the parsha there is a count of the all the items that they collected in order to create the Mishkan, and it begins Ele Pikudei HaMishkan Mishkan HaEdus. These are the numbers of the Mishkan of the testimony, Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe, that was counted by Moshe at the command of Moshe, etc. Now, what are they counting? So Rashi comments, and I put it on the source sheet. Rashi comments, in this parsha, these are the numbers in this parsha, all the weights of the donations for the Mishkan were counted, that of silver, of gold, and of copper, and all its implements for all its work were also counted. So it gives an accounting of how much they raised in their fundraiser for the Mishkan. That's Rashi's first comment. Then Rashi continues, and Rashi notes that there's a bit of a redundancy in this first pasuk. These are the numbers of the Mishkan of the testimony. Why not just say these are the numbers of the Mishkan of the testimony? Why does it have to repeat the word Mishkan twice? Says Rashi, the word Mishkan is written twice. This alludes to the temple, which was taken as a security, as a mashkon, by the two destructions for Israel's iniquities. In other words, the temples were taken as collateral for Israel's sins. When Israel fully repents, the third temple will be built. That's at least that explanation of this, the English here. But so the word Mishkan, which comes from the root shochen, to dwell, also relates to the Hebrew word for collateral, which is a mashkon. And Rashi is saying that there's an allusion here to the idea that the temples, the Batei Mikdash, the two Batei Mikdash, were taken as like a collateral on our behalf. Instead of us, basically. We were deserving of destruction, and instead God destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and that's what's being hinted to in this pasuk, in this verse, when it says HaMishkan Mishkan. It says it twice as a hint to the two Batei Mikdash, which were taken as mashkon, as collateral. Very interesting, but what's that doing here? We've been learning about the Mishkan for a while, 4 or 5 weeks, right? And this is the last parsha dealing with the Mishkan, or the creation of the Mishkan. And all of a sudden, the beginning of Parsha's Pikudei, this is where the Torah alludes to this idea by saying it twice, that there will be two temples that will be taken as a mashkon, as a collateral. Why is this here in Parsha's Pikudei, at the beginning of Parsha's Pikudei? So this is a question that the Maharal, in his commentary on Rashi, the Gur Aryeh, he asks, and he says that you see what he describes as a davar mufla b'chachma. You see something basically incredible in the wisdom of the Torah here. What is that? Why is it over here? Says the Maharal, and really this is a question posed by many commentaries. When I first came across the question, I was like a little bit like, is that really a question? The question the commentaries raise is, how could Moshe count up all of the things of the Mishkan? We have an idea really going back to Parshas Kisisa. When Moshe counts the people, he doesn't count the people directly. He collects coins to count the people, and that way the Torah says, Lo yeh bahem negef bifkodosam. That way there won't be a plague by counting them. And Rashi comments there, because if you count them directly, it casts an ayin hara, an evil eye upon the people. You don't count them directly. And therefore, the commentaries ask, why is Moshe counting up all of the parts of the Mishkan? They mention the Gemara in Maseches Tainus, which I put on the source sheet. The Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hanichnas lamod es garno, if a person goes to measure their produce, they should bless it first. They should say, Omer yehi ratzon lefanach Hashem Elokeinu shtishlach bracha b'maaseh yodenu. It should be God's will that you put blessing in the work of our hands, which interestingly is also the blessing that Moshe is later going to give to the Mishkan, only after he counts it, everything. But he but a person who goes to measure their grain, they should give a blessing before they start measuring it, before they know what they have. Hischil lamod, once they've begun to measure, the blessing is a little bit different. Once they've finished measuring it, if they measure it and then they give a blessing, then they pray to God, they pray to Hashem that it should be blessed after they've already measured it. The Gemara says, Harezut tefillah shav, it's a prayer in vain. Lefi she'ein habracha mitzuya lo b'davar hashakul v'lo b'davar hamadud v'lo b'davar hamanoi el b'davar hastami me'ayim. Because you don't find blessing on something that's being weighed, measured, counted, rather only on something that is hidden from the eye. Once you know the measurement, you cannot, God does not place blessing upon something. It's only when it's samay, when it's not known what it is, so then God can bless it. God will bless it. So you should pray to God to bless your grain before you count it, not after you count it. That's what the Gemara says. And the most surface understanding would be that, once you know, for it to change would be an open miracle. So if you know how much it weighs, then for it to change would be an open miracle. If you don't know yet, so then God can make it change without it being an open miracle, because nobody will know. And God doesn't make open miracles, at least not regularly, as opposed to hidden miracles that those happen all the time. That, I think, will be the most basic understanding of this. But based on this, the commentaries ask, what is Moshe doing counting up everything that's in the Mishkan? Isn't that taking away the ability for there to be blessing upon the Mishkan? And says the Maharal, yes, exactly, it does. And that's why the Mishkan and also later the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, which would also everything would be counted up, would later be destroyed. Because there was an ayin hara cast upon it. There was an evil eye cast upon it by counting up all the parts of it. That's what the Maharal says. And he says that's why this is found, this allusion to the idea that the temples are going to be taken from us is found here at the beginning of Parshas Pikudei. Because this is where the evil eye, the ayin hara, is cast upon the Mishkan and later on the Beis HaMikdash for the same reason, because it's being counted up. Very fascinating. Now, if we take a step further, if we think about it, consider it, so it seems at the end of the day that this was a good thing, right? Because the sages teach us that, the Midrash teaches us that really when we sinned in the time of the first temple, the second temple, God really wanted to destroy us. But shafach chamas al eitzim avanim, he cast his anger upon the wood and the bricks and the stones. In other words, he took the Beis HaMikdash from us instead of taking us. So it was a good thing. Because what really it would turn out, what it comes down to is, in a certain sense, had Moshe not counted the Beis HaMikdash, perhaps it would have been invincible, or not counted the parts of the Mishkan. Had these not been counted, perhaps they would have been invincible. Perhaps they couldn't be taken from us. Something built by Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, Moshe didn't build the Beis HaMikdash, he built the Mishkan. One Mishkan was destroyed. Then there were other Mishkans. But I think it's the idea is that it's being implanted. This possibility, this ayin hara is planting within the temples the possibility that they can be taken from us. which ultimately turns out to be a good thing. So, because you can wonder if it casting ayin hara, why is Moshe counting? And I think I tried to look through the verses more carefully to see if Hashem commands him to count. It's not so clear that he was commanded to, although a lot of what he does here, it says by the command of Hashem. But that would just add to the question, why would Hashem command him to count it? And the answer would be because we're preparing for the future. We're preparing for when Hashem would take out his anger, so to speak, on the Beis Hamikdash rather than upon us. That's what the Maharal says regarding the connection of this Rashi and the counting. Now, the Kedushas Levi, or Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, has a very different perspective on this question. Not the question of what this is doing here, but the question of how could it be that Moshe is counting the Mishkan? Isn't that going to cast an ayin hara, an evil eye? And the Kedushas Levi says absolutely not. He says that there are different ways that a person can look upon something, different ways that a person can count something, and one will cast a ayin hara, an evil eye, will cast kind of a curse upon the thing, and the other way that one can look on something will do the exact opposite, will cast blessing upon the thing. And he quotes a verse in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs. And the verse in Shir Hashirim says, in chapter 7, verse 5, it says, Tavarech k'migdal hashen. It says, it's describing the Beis Hamikdash, probably different ways to understand it, but one understanding is it's describing the Beis Hamikdash. Your neck is like an ivory tower. And it says, Einayich berechos becheshbon. Your eyes are like pools in cheshbon. Okay, without getting into what this might mean on a more simple level, again, Shir Hashirim is all allegory and very, very deep. But Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, he says, let's focusing on these words, Einayich berechos becheshbon. Again, here we translate it, your eyes are brecha is a pool. Your eyes are like pools in cheshbon. This translation assumes cheshbon is a place. But those words can also mean the following. Einayich, your eyes, brechos, they bless, like the word bracha, becheshbon, in calculation. That when you make a calculation, you can actually bring blessing. We said when you calculate, when you count, when you measure, you cast an evil eye. You can read this verse to say your eyes, they bless when they calculate. How so? So there's two ways to look upon something. The way the wicked, the way a rasha looks upon something, he places his eyes, he brings curse. Because he looks on it and he doesn't see any connection to the source. He either sees something and he says, this is mine, I want it, or he's jealous of something somebody else has, but he doesn't see where it comes from. Whoever has it because God granted it to them. If he doesn't have it, it's because God hasn't granted it to him. He's ready to misappropriate anything in existence for his own uses. He doesn't see the connection, the source of where everything in existence comes from. When a person looks upon something without seeing the source, says the Kedushas Levi, they separate it from that source. They separate it from the source. They separate it from the source of everything, from Hashem, and that is what brings curse. That's what brings an ayin hara, an evil eye upon something. But the way that the Jewish people, he says, look upon something, like this verse in Shir Hashirim, Einayich brechos becheshbon. Your eyes bring blessing in their calculating. Because when we count something, we want to know how much it is. We look upon the thing, we look upon the item, we look in this case upon the materials for the Mishkan, we see the source of all these things. We see the connection back to the source. We see that it all comes from Hashem. And therefore, rather than disconnecting it from its source, we connect it even stronger to its source, the source of all blessing, and that brings blessing upon those things. And so he says, certainly here, as the verse says, it was Pakad al pi Moshe, it was counted on the word of Moshe. So Moshe, the great leader of the Jewish people, who certainly when he looked on something, looked upon it and saw its connection back to God, back to the source of all, that, on the contrary, rather than bring a curse upon these things, it brought blessing upon them. And so, says the Kedushas Levi, in opposition to what the Maharal says, Kedushas Levi says, no, on the contrary, it will, the counting that Moshe would do, there's a way that a person can count, which brings blessing upon the thing. When we count and we view things with the right perspective, we look at the world and we see where it all comes from, and we connect it back to the source. That brings more bracha, more blessing, showering down upon whatever it is that we are counting. Okay, so that's two perspectives on the counting that Moshe does at the beginning of the Parsha. Now, moving a few verses later to verse 27, still in chapter 38, verse 27, we come back to something we talked about last week, which is the kikar, the adanim, the sockets. And the picture made it back on, although I zoomed in a little bit this time, and the picture's back on the source sheet, and the verse describes the counting of the silver that was used to create the sockets for the pillars, and it says, "Vayhi ma'as kikar kesef." There were 100 talents of silver. Latzekes es anei hakodesh, for casting the sockets of the holy of the Mishkan, basically of the walls. Ve'es anei paroches, and there were a couple of sockets used in holding up the curtain. Me'as adanim le'ma'as hakikar kikar la'adan. A total of 100 adanim, 100 sockets, and to make those 100 sockets, there was 100 talents of silver. So, fine. So in total, there were, again, these sockets are what the pillars of the Mishkan were placed into. There were 2 sockets per pillar. They held up the pillars of the Mishkan, and there were 100 of these sockets in the Mishkan, and a total of 100 silver talents to make those 100 silver sockets. Now, the Baal HaTurim comments on this verse, and he says, corresponding to these 100 adanim, these 100 sockets, the rabbis established that we should say 100 brachos every day, 100 blessings every day. Now, there is a concept of saying 100 blessings every day. Generally, we don't source it back to here. There's a number of different sources mentioned in Jewish literature. One is a Gemara in Menachos. The Gemara says, the Rabbi Meir said, a person is obligated to make 100 blessings every day, mea brachos, and he learns it from a verse that says, Ve'ata Yisrael, and now Israel, ma Hashem elkecha shoel meimach, what does Hashem ask of you? And there's different explanations, but it's learned from the word ma, which is very similar to the word mea. Ma is what? It's mem hey. Mea is mem aleph hey. So you can hear when you read it almost as if you're saying, Mea Hashem elkecha darish mimcha. 100 Hashem asks from you. Hashem asks from us 100 every day. 100 what? 100 blessings. That's one allusion. Another is that the Midrash teaches us that it was King David. David HaMelech established that we should say 100 blessings every day. There was a time where there was a plague. 100 people were dying every day. In response to this, David established the person should say 100 blessings every day. And if we daven 3 times a day, each one 19 blessings, add all the other blessings, we eat some food every day, then we get to those 100 blessings. There's a question if this applies for women as well, if they also are obligated to say 100 blessings. But leaving the halacha aside, we have this concept that a person should try to say 100 blessings a day. But what does that have to do with our pasuk, our verse, where the Baal HaTurim says that because there were 100 pillars, 100 sockets in the Mishkan, so we should say 100, corresponding to that, the rabbis established 100 blessings every day. What is the connection? There must be some connection. It's more than just, 100, 100. Let's connect these two ideas. There must be something more fundamental here. So Rav Asher Weiss suggests that it goes deeper than just 100, 100. What are these sockets? These sockets are really what hold up the entire Mishkan. The sockets are the foundation, basically, into which the walls, the pillars of the Mishkan were placed. So without these sockets, the pillars would just fall over and the Mishkan would not stand. So in a certain sense, these sockets are the foundation that holds up the entire Mishkan. Says Rav Asher Weiss, so too, the 100 blessings that we say, these are the foundation that hold up our personal Mishkan, our own temple that we try to build within ourselves, where we try to bring Hashem into our daily lives. What holds that up? It's the blessings that we say every day. Hopefully 100 blessings. Those blessings that we say every day are what bring Hashem into our lives. Because if we spend our day making blessings and we don't just say them by rote, but we actually think about them, so then our entire existence will be completely altered. If we focus and when we eat something, we have kavana, we focus and we have intent, and we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, you are the source of all blessing, Hashem. And we say Atah, we speak directly to Hashem. And we realize that we're expressing our appreciation to Hashem, then it's life-changing. And it brings the presence of Hashem into our lives, and it impacts everything else that we do that day. If each time we make a blessing, we remember that this comes from Hashem. I have so much to thank Hashem for, so much to thank God for, then we bring God into our lives, and that's the pillars, the foundation, really. The foundation, just like the sockets, the 100 sockets, were the foundation that held up the Mishkan, that made the Mishkan a dwelling place for Hashem, for Hashem's presence. So too, our 100 blessings that we can make every day are the foundations for making our own selves and our own lives into a Mishkan, bringing the presence of Hashem into our lives through those blessings. Okay, that's idea number 2. And one more idea from the Parsha. This is, in my opinion, an incredible insight. And we move ahead now to chapter 39. We turn the page if you're following on the source sheet to discuss the Me'il, which was one of the garments of the Kohen Gadol. And the Me'il was his robe. It was an outer robe. He had a tunic underneath, like an undershirt. And on top of that, he had a robe which covered him. He actually had a tunic, like an undershirt, and pants, which were basically underpants. And then he had this robe that covered it. And on top of the robe, he had the ephod, which was like an apron. And he had the choshen. He had the breastplate that had the stones, which we spoke about a couple weeks ago. But we did not speak about the Me'il. So let's read a few verses that describe the Me'il for us. The Me'il, again, is the robe that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wore. So Shemos, Perek Lametes, it's really chapter 39, not 38. It's a mistake in the English side. It says, Vayas es ha-Me'il. And he made the robe. I believe this is talking about Betzalel, who was making the garments, if I'm not mistaken. Vayas es me'il ha'ephod. He made the robe of the ephod, of the apron, Maseh orei kalil techeles, the work of a weaver of blue wool. Okay, let's skip ahead. Skip the next verse. So let's skip to 24. Chaf Daled. Vayasu al shulei ha'me'il rimonei techeles v'argaman v'tolash shani mashar. They made on the bottom hem of the robe pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson wool twisted. So there were pomegranates hanging from the bottom of the Kohen Gadol's robe. Next verse, Vayasu pamonei zahav tahar. And they also made bells of pure gold. Vayinos hapamonim betoch harimonim. And they placed the pomegranates in the bells in the pomegranates, al shulei me'il, on the hem of the robe, saviv, around it, betoch harimonim, in the midst, or in the pomegranates. Pamon v'rimon, a pamon, a bell, and a pomegranate. Pamon v'rimon, a bell and a pomegranate. Al shulei me'il, saviv, on the hem of the me'il, around it. So we have that the Torah describes that there were on the bottom of the me'il, on the bottom of the robe, there were pomegranates, and there were bells bitoch harimonim. There were bells in or within the pomegranates. Now, where were these bells? If we say they were toch, so it means they were in or they were within. So were they in the pomegranates, or were they in between the pomegranates? Like, in between the pomegranates, you had bells. They were within the pomegranates. So this is actually a dispute between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi holds that they were in between. Rashi holds the bells weren't inside the pomegranates. When it says they were toch, they were in, it means they were within. They were in between the pomegranate. So you had pomegranate and then a bell and then a pomegranate. So that there was always a bell within each of the pomegranates. And all the way to the last one. So it would turn out, I guess, well, it went all the way around. So I'm not sure. There would be bells within each of the pomegranates, surrounded by pomegranates. That's Rashi. The Ramban says no. It means that the bells were actually inside the pomegranates. Okay, that's the dispute between Rashi and the Ramban. Now the problem is that if we look in the Targum Onkelos, the Aramaic translation, in our Parsha, so it would appear that Onkelos is learning like the opinion of the Ramban. Because look, in the translation of Onkelos, it's in the box, it says, it's in Aramaic, Vavadu zagin zahav, you should make gold bells, dechay, of pure gold, v'yahavu yasagaya b'gorimonaya, and you should put the bells in the pomegranates. And that sounds like the Ramban, which is fine. So the Ramban, the Targum Onkelos holds like the Ramban, that the bells were actually inside the pomegranates. The problem is that if we go back to Parshas Tetzaveh, which is where the original command to create the Me'il is found, so there Targum Onkelos seems to say the opposite. He seems to say like Rashi. If you look in the next box, the last box on the page 2, and you skip to the middle of the box, Targum Onkelos, there he says very clearly, it's the underlined part, Zagin didahav beinei hon. The gold bells between them. There shall be gold bells between them. So he's clearly using different words. In Parshas Tetzaveh, when this is, so just keep note that on the source sheet, it's out of order, meaning it's out of what's the word I'm looking for? Basically I put our Parsha first, but this is when they actually did it, our Parsha, when they actually made it. The command, though, which is lower on the sheet, came first, is in chapter 28, as opposed to us, we're in chapter 39. So back in chapter 28, Perek Chavches, Onkelos says that the Zagin Dahav Beinei Hon, the bells of gold should be between them. And over here, he uses different words. He says the bells of gold should be bigo rimonin, inside the bigo rimonaya, inside them. So Onkelos seems to change from Parshas Tetzaveh until our Parsha. And that is very difficult to understand. Why would Targum Onkelos change his explanation for where these bells are located from that Parsha to this Parsha? From the command to create the begadim, to create the garments, to how they were actually created. Let's ask one more question. If we look in the Targum Yonasan, the Targum Yonasan is another ancient Aramaic translation. So we find another discrepancy between Parshas Tetzaveh and our Parsha. So again, starting in the top box in our Parsha, so Targum Yonasan says, when he translates the verse 26, Pasuk Chavav, he says a bell and a pomegranate, all of them 72. There are different nuschaos, different versions. Some don't have the word two, but it seems that that's a more reliable one, is that he says they had 72 bells. Okay, 72 bells. Great, wonderful. The problem is that if you go back to Parshas Tetzaveh, he says, it's the very last source on the page, their number 71. There were 71 bells. So what's going on here? In Parshas Tetzaveh, Targum Yonasan says there were 71 bells. And here in Parshas Pikudei, when they actually make the Me'il, he says there were 72 bells. So the easiest answer is one of them must be a mistake. Erase it and correct it. And I think there are those who suggest that one of them is a mistake, and he meant whatever. I guess 71, 72, whatever he meant. But he didn't. The discrepancy is just a clerical error. There's not really supposed to be a different number. But that's the easy way out. But Rav Beryl Pavarsky, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the Panovich Yeshiva, offers an incredible answer to this, to both of these questions. First of all, why does Targum Onkelos change? That in Parshas, when the command is given, Onkelos says that like Rashi, that the bells were between the pomegranates, not in the pomegranates, but between them. And in our Parsha, he says that the bells were inside the pomegranates, like how the Ramban understood it. And secondly, why does Targum Yonasan change the numbers? Back in Parshas Tetzaveh, he says there were 71 bells, and in this Parsha he says there were 72 bells. And explains Rav Beryl Pavarsky that we've actually discussed this thing back in Parshas Truma, but there's different ways to understand the chronology. I think that's the word I was looking for before. The chronology of the Parshas that we're in. So we know that after the revelation at Sinai, which is Parshas Yisro and Mishpatim, so then Parshas Truma begins the command to build the Mishkan. And that's Truma, and then Tetzaveh is the command of how to create the garments of the Kohen Gadol, and how to inaugurate the Kohanim. And then we have Parshas Kisisa. And Parshas Kisisa is where the golden calf, the Chet HaEgel, takes place. So one approach is that really it's out of order. That really first came the Chet HaEgel, first came the golden calf, and as a result of the Chet HaEgel came the command to build the Mishkan as an atonement. That's one approach. But the Ramban says, no, that's not what happened. What actually happened was that the Parshas are in order of how they happened. The chronology is in order. And Moshe was given the command to build the Mishkan, and he was given the command to create the garments of the Kohen Gadol, Parshas Truma, Parshas Tetzaveh, of the Kohanim. And then, in the middle, before he had a chance to impart those commands to the Jewish people, Chet HaEgel, the sing of the golden calf. And everything was delayed. He broke the luchos, he went back up, he came back down, the whole thing. And it wasn't until, and although he had received the command before the sing of the golden calf, he was only able to impart it much later after we received forgiveness on Yom Kippur. Sing of the golden calf happened on the 17th of Tammuz, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and he was only able to impart these instructions much later on the day after Yom Kippur. Well, that part everybody agrees to. The question is, when did he receive the instructions? Before or after? So suggests Rebero Pavarsky, if we understand that he received the command before, then we might be able to understand this a little better. There's an idea, there's a custom that people don't wear gold on Yom Kippur. Why not? So it actually is based on that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, went into the Holy of Holies, he would not wear any gold on his garments. And the reason is because of a concept called Ein Kategar Nases Hanegar. The accuser does not become the defendant. And the accuser is the gold, because the gold reminds God of the Chet HaEgel, of the golden calf. And so on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies to seek atonement for us, we don't want any reminder about the golden calf, and therefore he removes any garment that contains gold. He only wears, out of his 8 garments, he only wears 4, the linen garments, the white linen garments, and no gold. Because Ein Kategar Nases Hanegar, the accuser doesn't become the defendant. We don't want any gold present when the Kohen Gadol is seeking atonement for us on Yom Kippur. And that's why some people don't wear gold at all as a custom on Yom Kippur. I don't wear any gold on Yom Kippur. But I don't wear any gold anytime. But actually leads us into this question is, okay, but how come the Kohen Gadol can wear gold the rest of the year? Why is it only on Yom Kippur? And it seems that, okay, it's a fair question, but the gold vestments were important. He needs to wear the vestments that contain gold. There's a reason they contain gold, and he's still going to wear them. But if there's a way that we can, at least where we can, avoid and hide the gold, so that we try to do. That the Torah tries to do. And not only that, I would add that specifically the bells, which made noise, there's a reason they made noise. There was a purpose to them. But the bells which made noise and drew attention to themselves, even the rest of the year, we don't want those to be seen. The bells which were made of gold, we don't want them to be seen. So says Rebero Pavarsky, originally when Moshe was given the command of how to make the me'il, the bells were going to be out in the open. They were going to be in between the pomegranates, out in the open, because there was no accuser yet. There was no sing of the golden calf yet. The command was given before the golden calf, and therefore the bells were supposed to be out in the open. But following the sing of the golden calf, so now we don't want these bells which make noise, and we could hide them, so we do. Following the command of the golden calf, so the sing of the golden calf, then the way that we create the meal changes. And when it's actually made, the gold bells are put inside the pomegranates, hidden away inside the pomegranates where you can't see them. They'll still make their noise, they'll still fulfill their purpose, but you won't be able to see them. And that's why in Parshas Tetzaveh, when the command is given, Onkelos says they're going to be in between, because originally they were supposed to be in between. It's only after the sing of the golden calf that they were moved to be inside the bells, inside the pomegranates, out of sight. And indeed, actually, if you look in the verses, this is implied. Because if you look in Parshas Tetzaveh, which again is the last source on the page, and you look at verse 34, it says, Pamon Zahav V'Rimon, a gold bell and a pomegranate. Pamon Zahav V'Rimon, a gold bell and a pomegranate. But if you look in our Parsha, Parshas Pikudei, chapter 39, verse 26, it says, Pamon V'Rimon, Pamon V'Rimon, a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate. It doesn't say anymore that they're gold. It's not that they weren't gold. They still were made of gold. It said that before. But when it describes how they looked, when you put the bell and the pomegranate together, it no longer mentions that they're gold, because you couldn't see them anymore. because once the bells were in the pomegranates, you couldn't see the gold anymore. So there it just says a bell on pomegranate. This idea, first of all, this idea from Rabbi Farsky, I heard it from Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein and his Parsha Shir this week. And he mentioned, Rabbi Farsky doesn't say this last point, he mentioned it. Actually, he said a student had shared it with him. But it's a beautiful point that it's really implied in the verse that the gold was no longer visible in our Parsha, as opposed to in Parsha Tetzaveh, where it was still visible. And this, says Rabbi Farsky, also explains why Targum Yonasan originally says that there were 71 bells, but now in our Parsha says that there were 72. Because originally, the bells were in between the pomegranates. So there were 72 pomegranates, and in between them, there were 71 bells. But now, the bells are no longer in between the pomegranates, they're in the pomegranates. And so since there are 72 pomegranates, therefore there were now 72 bells inside each of the pomegranates. And that explains the change from 71 to 72. So it's absolutely incredible. If we pay attention and we dig deeper, that these just incredible insights are to be found, and we should continue to learn and explore. Okay, pause there.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
I mean, this is really fun.